There was a barely audible knock on the door. That kind of soft, careful knock was usually Mom's. "Yeah, Mom?" I called out. She slowly opened the door to my room and softly asked, "Jack, are you going to eat?"
"No," I replied flatly.
Mom let out a sad sigh and sat down on the edge of my bed. "What am I going to do with you? I can't stand seeing you like this." "Then leave the room," I snapped at her. "Jack, you're a grown boy. You understand she's not coming back." Yes, she was young, but that's how it happened. Her life ended. But yours is still going on. "Mom, enough," I said firmly. Then I got up from the bed and walked into the hallway. "And where are you going?" she asked, following me down the corridor. "I'll be back soon," I replied as I stepped out into the stairwell. How is that even possible? Mom's an adult. Can't she understand what I'm feeling? Although, to be fair, there's definitely a reason for it. About 2 months ago, my stepsister Kate passed away. Mom and Dad divorced when I was about a year old. Not long after that, Dad met another woman and eventually married her. Though, to be honest, their wedding was what you'd call a shotgun wedding. Kate and I weren't far apart in age, and that's what sparked our friendship. Of course, Mom absolutely hated Dad's new wife with all her heart and was incredibly cold toward Kate. But at the end of the day, Dad was still Dad, and she couldn't forbid us from seeing each other. So, she bottled up all her negativity. Or maybe she just couldn't move on and find someone else to marry. Time passed, we grew up, and eventually we started school. It just so happened that we went to the same school, though we were in different classes. I saw her often and spent a lot of time with her. She was my best friend, and I was hers. I remember wiping her tears after her first heartbreak, how she covered for me in front of Dad, how we celebrated summer vacations together, and later, just the simple joy of summer itself. Not long before her death, we took a walk through the city at night. It was autumn, but unusually warm. Kate was enthusiastically talking about a new guy she liked, and I was genuinely happy for her. She had her whole life ahead of her. Or at least that's what I thought at the time. Her young life came to an abrupt end on a cold autumn day. She had been stuck in classes until late, and by the time evening rolled around, she was completely exhausted and starving. All she wanted that day, well, that evening, was to get home. The weather outside was brutally cold. I think all of those factors combined led to Kate running across the street against the red light. In her defense, I should mention that the security footage clearly shows her looking both ways, and after confirming there were no cars nearby, she ran into the street. But just as she was almost at the sidewalk, a car came around the blind corner. The driver lost control and the collision happened. The impact threw my sister right into the bus. It was so forceful that there was a dent on the wall from her head hitting it. The paramedics arrived at the scene, provided assistance, and immediately took her to the hospital. More specifically, to the intensive care unit. She spent a week in the intensive care unit, but never regained consciousness. Hope for her recovery faded with each passing day. But as they say, hope dies last. And one cold November day, hope finally died. I still remember how my father broke the news to me about her passing. Although I had prepared for it, as it turned out, there's no way to truly prepare for something like this. I barely remember that time. My memories of the funeral and the days that followed are fragmented. I didn't want anything, neither to sleep, nor eat, nor talk to anyone. Even her parents were holding it together better than I was. A month later, my condition improved a little. There was some activity in my life again. But the sadness and depression still clung to me as faithful companions. I can only wonder when it will get easier. It's been about 2 months since her death. The realization that she won't come back finally settled in. But I still don't understand where the justice is in all of this. Her young life was cut so abruptly, and there was so much she never got to see or do. I often went to my sister's grave, talking to her as if she were still alive. But what was the point? From that granite headstone, the young face of Kate stared back at me, a face that would never be able to respond again. With these dark thoughts, I ran out of the building and took a deep breath of the cold January air. There weren't many people on the street, since the New Year celebrations hadn't ended yet. Usually, on days like this, everyone was in a festive mood, visiting each other, gorging on mandarins, spending evenings watching TV, setting off fireworks. Basically doing the same things they did year after year. But for me, I couldn't care less about the holidays or the fun.
I was heading to the nearest store to buy cigarettes when suddenly I got a notification on my phone. It was from Jonathan, my friend. He was inviting me over, saying they were hanging out together. I turned around and thought, why not? Sitting at home, feeling miserable seemed worse. Plus, everything there reminded me of her.
Of course, we didn't live under the same roof, but in the past few years, we often visited each other. I quickly sent a text to my mom telling her not to wait for me and headed to the bus stop. Luckily, the bus I needed showed up quickly. It was only a couple of stops away anyway. I could have walked, but in -30 degrees Celsius, I really wasn't in the mood for that. When Jonathan opened the front door, it was clear he was already a bit drunk. "Hey Jack, come in, you're one of us," he greeted me cheerfully. I just nodded and shook his hand. In the narrow kitchen, there were two more, Kevin and Lucas. They were in about the same state as Jonathan. They immediately poured me a mug of beer. I downed it in one go. "What's going on?" Kevin asked, his speech a bit slurred. "Are you messing with me?" I replied with a question of my own. "Is it again because of Kate?" "Well, drink up, maybe it'll help," he advised. And I drank. I wasn't going to get any support from them, not because they were bad or wished me harm, but because they simply didn't know any other way. After a while, our group switched from beer to vodka. I'm not sure why, but the conversation just wasn't flowing. Lucas was zoning out, and Kevin was trying to say something, but no one was really listening. Probably because of that, the sadness hit me again. It weighed on me like a heavy burden. I realized I didn't want to be around these people anymore. It was better to be alone. "All right, guys, I'm heading home," I said as I stood up from the table. "Hey, where are you going at this hour?" Jonathan tried to stop me. "Home. Don't be stupid, stay here. You've got nothing to do at home right now." I wasn't actually planning to go home. I wanted to visit my sister's grave. It was pretty much a routine for me, but it was nighttime and I wasn't sober. "All right, I'm going to Kate's," I said, not too politely as I said my goodbyes. "To Kate? To the cemetery, you mean?" Lucas asked, confirming. "Are you out of your mind? Do you know what time it is?" Kevin snapped. "No, you're not going anywhere." Jonathan tried to calm me down. Of course, I didn't listen to anyone, got ready, and left the apartment. As I stood in the hallway, I overheard some rustling and snippets of conversation like, "Where's he going now?" and "Let's go with him?" and "Maybe screw it." I interrupted their whispers by shouting, "Jonathan, close the door behind me." He immediately walked out of the kitchen and said, as if cutting it off, "Well, since you're so set on it, let's go together. Come on, why would you guys come? What's there to do? Just keeping an eye on you, idiot." "All right," I shrugged. "I don't care if I'm alone or with you. If you've got nothing better to do, let's go." I had to lean against the door frame and wait for these fools. I honestly should have just gone alone. I should have told them I was going home after all. Or not home, whatever. The main thing was that I wasn't going to the cemetery. I made one more half-hearted attempt to stop them, but they wouldn't listen. So our little group left the building together. For some reason, the guys brought alcohol with them and started drinking along the way. I didn't feel like drinking anymore. Honestly, I regretted about 10 times that I didn't stick to my guns and go alone. They were chatting animatedly, recalling some dumb childhood ghost stories, laughing like fools. At one point, my patience snapped. I turned around and, raising my voice, said, "If you guys like laughing and gossiping like old women, then just get the hell out of here." "Come on, Jack. Why so angry?" Lucas shot back, as if he was ready for it, and almost immediately handed me a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of beer. I silently grabbed it and threw it with all my strength into the snowbank. "Hey, what's your problem? I offered it to you nicely," he snapped. "We just need to step aside for a bit." "You guys go ahead, we'll catch up," Kevin called out. But I didn't answer and just kept walking ahead in silence. Jonathan hesitated for a couple of seconds, but eventually decided to walk beside me. We casually exchanged a few words, and then the conversation started flowing on its own. I don't remember exactly what we were talking about at that moment, but I do remember why we both suddenly fell silent. The monotonous clang cut through the dead silence. It felt like something metal was being hit against the fence. "What's that?" Jonathan asked, frightened. "Hell if I know." "Wait, where are those two?" We exchanged a look, then glanced around us. Kevin and Lucas were nowhere to be seen. "Hey, stop messing around," Jonathan shouted, but all we got in response was silence. The sound of metal banging continued at the same regular intervals. "I don't get it. Should I try calling them?" I suggested, to which he nodded. I grabbed my phone and tried calling. First one, then the other, but all I got was voicemail. They probably left and turned off their phones. "This is kind of sketchy. Maybe we should head home too?" My friend asked me. "If you want, go ahead. I'm not really in the mood to go home right now," I replied calmly. "All right," he replied, slightly annoyed, and we continued on. On the way to the grave, I noticed something. Even though we were moving further away, the sound didn't get any quieter or louder. Maybe if I were sober, I would have already run off the cemetery, kicking up snow behind me. But alcohol was doing its thing and I couldn't care less. Unlike Jonathan, he looked as pale as a corpse. "How much longer?" he asked. "About 15 minutes, maybe a little more." He whistled but didn't say anything. We walked in silence, but not for long. As soon as we turned the corner, he suddenly spoke up. "I need to step away for a bit. Will you wait here?" "Are you serious?" "No, I really just need to run around the corner." "So, will you wait here?" "Well, what else can I do?" I replied. "I'll be quick," he said, and then turned around, walking quickly away from me. It seemed like he had been holding it in for a while. While he was gone, I lit a cigarette, and when it burned down to the filter, I realized that Jonathan had also gone off toward home. Or maybe he got lost somewhere. Just to be sure, I called out for him a few times and tried calling, but it was all in vain. I don't get why they had to come with me. I would have been fine going alone. But no, all three of them headed toward home. I could have used my phone's flashlight, but the battery was only at 10%. Plus, the cold was biting. I should have just gone tomorrow morning. Suddenly, I heard a sound. Someone was walking toward me, the snow crunching under their feet. I thought it was the local night watchman, so I decided to quietly move toward the exit. But it wasn't the watchman. A dog was running toward me. It was easily maneuvering through the fences on all fours. Still, it was probably better to head home, since we didn't belong here. And it was getting late. I was about to leave when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something off. Dogs don't look like that. What was approaching me looked like a person. Or maybe it was a person. I was sure it was time to leave, so I turned around, but as it turned out, there was nowhere to go. Right behind me stood a corpse. A regular corpse, with bluish skin and a twisted face. I screamed at the top of my lungs and tried to jump back, but they surrounded me from all sides. The sight will stay with me forever. There were many of them. I don't know exactly how many, but definitely more than 10. They were of all ages. Old, elderly, adults, even very small children. The closer they got to me, the louder that same sound of metal striking grew. It hadn't stopped the entire time we had been there. Now it felt as if it was banging right next to my ear. I felt both terrified and nauseous at the same time. These half-decayed bodies closed in on me, emitting a nauseating stench. Despite the cold, it was the smell of sweetness mixed with rot. It made me throw up right onto my jacket. A cold hand grabbed my neck, so tightly that I couldn't move. For some reason, I fell into unconsciousness. Felt like it was all just a bad dream. I thought, I'm just sleeping drunk in Jonathan's hallway. Dozens of pale blue hands touched my face, limbs, stomach, and hair. I saw their ugly, disfigured faces up close, and noticed one of them drooling, with the saliva mixed with pus. One of the figures in the crowd grabbed my arm and twisted it clockwise. I heard a crack, either bones or ligaments breaking. My scream echoed across the entire cemetery. I screamed loudly and for a long time, until my voice went hoarse. But who was there to hear me? These corpses didn't even flinch. Maybe they couldn't hear any sounds anymore. The pain they caused me wasn't enough for them. I felt a sharp pain at the top of my head. Apparently, one of them had yanked a chunk of hair from my scalp. I prayed to God for all of this to end quickly. Death was inevitable, but I just wanted it to come sooner. And it seemed that the Almighty heard my prayers. In an instant, the hand that was on my neck tightened its grip, choking me, and my vision began to fade. I had no strength left to fight. Before my eyes appeared a blooming summer meadow. The sun was at its zenith, shining so brightly that my eyes started to hurt just from looking at it. 10 steps away, my sister stood. I ran to her with all my strength and hugged her tightly. She hugged me back just as tightly. "Kate, are you alive? I can't believe it," I exclaimed. She smiled sadly and, lowering her eyes to the floor, said, "I'm no longer among you, but now your friends are with me. It's not your time yet. Go, run and don't look back." "But how?" I barely managed to say before she disappeared. Then, suddenly, everything around me went dark, and surprisingly, it wasn't cold. There was nothing around, just complete darkness and frost. The wind was cutting through, so strong that I had to shield myself with my hands. In that moment, I remembered everything from that evening and quickly opened my eyes. It was night, snowdrifts, the cemetery, but where were all those corpses? Maybe it was just a dream, a bad dream. How could something like this even happen in a dream? I barely managed to get to my feet, and I was stunned. All my clothes were some dirty brown color, and I smelled like rotten something. Could this really not be a dream? How did all of this happen? Without thinking, I ran like a maniac off the cemetery. As I ran, I saw some disturbances in the snow here and there. So what does this mean? Did Kate save me? By the evening of the next day, none of my friends had been in touch. I kept calling them, checking their social media and messages, but everything was in vain. It was like they vanished off the face of the earth. I had a feeling I knew what happened to them, but I kept hoping for the best until the very end. Still, my hope faded more with each passing day. I went to Kevin and Lucas's homes, but neither their parents nor the neighbors had seen them. Later, the police and search and rescue teams started looking for them, but I ended up seeing the investigator more than I saw my own family. They had to find someone to blame, but in the end, all 3 of the missing were last seen with me. About a month later, Their bodies were found in a ravine at the edge of the cemetery. I couldn't even begin to imagine the horror they went through before they died. Lucas's eyes had been gouged out. His mouth and nostrils were filled with dirt. Someone had carefully shoved black clumps of earth into his mouth and nose, even packing them down. There was a clean, straight knife cut all along his spine, and his backbone was missing. The investigation is ongoing.
I'm under surveillance.
Sometimes, I dream of Kate along with my now-deceased friends, and sometimes I dream of that night spent in the cemetery. I often wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, and sweat on my forehead.